Schopenhauer's warning, why society dreads geniuses. Let me ask you something that seems so obvious, but we rarely stop to truly feel it. Why is it that the greatest minds in history have so often died alone, ridiculed, and misunderstood, or worse, forgotten until long after their bones have turned to dust? Why do we, as a society, fear our own visionaries? Why do we resist the very people who are trying to show us a deeper truth? Today's journey isn't just philosophical, it's personal. We're diving into Schopenhauer's haunting insight that society doesn't merely ignore genius, it dreads it. And that dread is not just about misunderstanding, it's about survival. Because when a genius enters the room is forced to see itself. And most of us would rather stay blind. Schopenhauer, the brooding German philosopher who shaped Nietzsche's worldview and anticipated Freud's theories of the unconscious, was not just a thinker, he was a warning. He believed the genius was not just a person of great intellect, but of a radically different nature. We think of geniuses as brilliant minds who can do math faster or invent things earlier. But Schopenhauer saw something deeper. To him, the genius sees the world not as it appears, but as it is. They cut through the illusions that most people spend their lives clinging to. And that makes them dangerous not because they're violent, but because their presence alone threatens the comforting lies that hold society together.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Imagine you're living in a village where everyone wears glasses that distort reality just enough to make life bearable. The colors are brighter, the edges softer, the faces kinder. One day, a person walks in without glasses. They see the dirt, the decay, the hidden cruelty. And they try to tell you, not to hurt you, but to free you. What's your first reaction? Gratitude or fear? Be honest. Would you rip off your own glasses or accuse them of madness? This is the core of Schopenhauer's insight. He believed that society is organized not around truth, but around comfort, around repetition, around illusion. And the genius by their very nature shatters that illusion. They don't try to, they just can't help it. Their very existence is a confrontation. And that's why society doesn't just exclude them, it actively punishes them. We don't celebrate genius until it's safe, until it's dead, until it can no longer challenge us. Look at Vincent van Gogh. He died penniless, tormented, barely known. And today his art is priceless. Look at Nietzsche, mocked in his time, institutionalized, now quoted in every college dorm and viral YouTube video. Look at Emily Dickinson, Kafka, even Tesla. Their genius didn't make their lives easier, it made them unbearable. Because they saw too much, and the world wasn't ready. Schopenhauer believed that this wasn't an accident, it was predictable. He viewed humanity not as rational creatures seeking truth, but as desperate beings seeking relief from the suffering of existence. Most people, he argued, live in a haze of will driven by desire, ego, and instinct. They don't want to reflect. They want to survive. They want to possess, to succeed, to be admired. The genius, on the other hand, steps outside this flow. They become contemplative. They see the absurdity of chasing status, the futility of wars, the hollowness of social rituals. And in doing so, they become strangers in their own world. Have you ever felt that? That you're seeing something more beauty, more pain, more meaning, but no one else seems to notice? That you're speaking a language no one else understands? That when you express your deepest thoughts, people look at you like you've just confessed a crime. That's not in your head. That's the isolation Schopenhauer warned about. He called it the tragic fate of genius. Not because geniuses are cursed, but because society is too frightened to meet them where they are. And here's the dark twist. The more true your vision, the more threatening it becomes. Mediocrity is safe. It confirms what people already believe. But genius? Genius demands transformation. It demands death, the death of old beliefs, old comforts, old selves. And most people would rather kill the messenger than change the message. So ask yourself, if you knew that seeing the world more clearly would cost you everything, your friendships, your peace, your place in society, would you still want to see? Would you still want to know? Because truth doesn't just set you free. It often sets you apart. The genius as a mirror, why people attack what they secretly admire. When Schopenhauer said that society dreads geniuses, he didn't mean society simply ignores them or fails to appreciate them. No, he meant something deeper, more primal. The society fears them. It reacts to them the way the unconscious reacts to trauma, through denial, projection, and aggression. But Schopenhauer saw that the genius acts as a mirror, an unrelenting one, reflecting back not who we pretend to be, but who we truly are. And no one likes to see what they've spent their life hiding from. So instead of embracing the genius, society turns them into a threat, an outcast, a heretic. Not because they are wrong, but because they are too right. You've felt this, haven't you? That strange discomfort when someone says something that cuts too close to the bone. When they speak with a clarity that makes the air feel heavier. You admire it, but you flinch. You feel exposed. That's the paradox of genius. We admire them from afar, in books, in museums, in documentaries. But when they're alive, when they're near, when they are just another human being in the room speaking truths without flinching, we can't handle it. Because they make our illusions impossible to sustain. They remind us of what we're not doing, not thinking, not becoming. Schopenhauer believed the genius operates outside the normal structure of human desire. Most people are driven by the will to life ambition, competition, survival, reproduction. But the genius is driven by contemplation. They step out of the river of instincts and stand on the bank, watching, observing, understanding. And that very act of perceiving reality without needing to twist it into something useful makes the genius profoundly alien. And that alienation is the root of society's hostility. Because when someone sees through the game, they can no longer be trusted to play by its rules. And society is built on rules. Now here's where things get even darker. The hatred society has for its geniuses is not always loud. It's subtle. It's in the way the genius is laughed at in meetings for suggesting something too ambitious. But it's in the way the visionary artist is told to compromise just a little more. It's in the way the child who asks deep questions is told to stop being weird. Genius is not crushed with violence, it is smothered with mediocrity, but death by 1,000 dull comments. But underneath all that resistance, all that ridicule, there's something even more painful: envy. Deep, aching, silent envy. Because while society mocks the genius, it also secretly wants what they have. That clarity, that freedom, that piercing insight. And yet, instead of seeking to grow, most people seek to destroy the source of their discomfort. It's easier to bring the genius down to our level than to rise to meet them. That's the tragedy. We don't just fear geniuses, we envy them, and then turn that envy into punishment. So what does this mean for those of us who feel that spark? Who think differently, feel deeply, see the world in a strange, unspoken way? It means we have a choice. We can dim ourselves to fit in, or we can burn brighter, knowing that the light might blind others. Schopenhauer would say, choose the second path. Not because it's easier, it's not, but because it's true. Because the genius doesn't exist to be liked, understood, or applauded. They exist to see, and in their seeing, they offer humanity a chance to evolve. But here's the question I want to leave you with. If you knew that your deepest truth would make others hate you, but it could also awaken something in just one other person, would you still speak it? Because maybe that's the purpose of the genius, not to be accepted, but to awaken. The genius and the herd, why originality feels like betrayal to the masses. There's something deeply unsettling about originality. It doesn't just present a new idea, it disturbs the old order. But it doesn't just add a new color to the palette, it calls the entire painting into question. And this is why Schopenhauer believed that society reacts to the genius not with curiosity, but with hostility. Because the genius doesn't merely say something new, they make it impossible to keep pretending that the old ways were ever sufficient. And for the herd, that vast collective of minds trained to conform, obey, and repeat, that feels like betrayal. To understand this, we have to see how society operates at its core. Most people don't want truth. They want belonging. They want to feel safe in a group, to be accepted, to move with the current. The herd doesn't ask, what is real? It asks, what is normal? And anything that deviates from that norm is seen as a threat, not because it's wrong, but because it forces the herd to question its identity. The genius, by existing outside the norm, becomes a living reminder that the norm is not the limit of what's possible. And that's terrifying. Think about it. Imagine you've spent your entire life building a house out of sand, believing it's the strongest structure ever created. Then someone walks by and builds a tower of steel right next to it. They don't insult your house. They don't even mention it. But suddenly you see your house for what it is: fragile, temporary, illusory. Do you thank them for the insight? Or do you curse them for the comparison? That's how society sees the genius. Not as a builder of truth, but as a destroyer of comfort. Schopenhauer saw this dynamic clearly. He believed the genius was doomed to isolation precisely because they could not help but be original. They don't copy, they create. They don't echo, they invent. And in doing so, they make the herd feel exposed. Because originality, real originality, is not just new, it's disobedient. It refuses to bow to tradition, to convention, to the way things have always been done. And to the herd, that refusal looks like rebellion, arrogance, even treason. But here's the deepest irony. The herd needs the genius. Desperately. All progress, all beauty, all truth comes from those who step outside the line. Every great work of art, every scientific breakthrough, every leap in human consciousness began with someone who dared to think differently. And yet, the herd resists them at every turn. It mocks them, marginalizes them, sometimes even crucifies them until, decades or centuries later, it rewrites history to make it seem like it always embraced them. But by then the genius is gone, and the herd has found a new rebel to reject. So what does this mean for us? It means that if you have an original thought, something that feels raw, strange, powerful, you have to expect resistance. Not because you're wrong, but because you're different. And difference, in a world addicted to sameness, is always punished before it's praised. The genius walks a lonely road not because they want to, but because the road of truth has never been crowded. But here's the deeper question. Would you still walk that road if no one followed? Would you still create, speak, and dare, even if it meant being misunderstood your entire life? That's the burden of the genius, not just to see what others don't, but to keep seeing it when no one else believes you. To keep creating even when the world calls you mad, and to remain loyal to truth, even when that truth exiles you. And in that exile, something sacred happens. The genius becomes free not of others, but of the need for their approval. And that, Schopenhauer believed, is where true genius begins, not in the mind, but in the will to stand alone. The final insight, why the genius must choose solitude over success. Schopenhauer left us with one final, bitter truth, one that many reject because it tastes too much like loss. He believed that the genius must ultimately embrace solitude, not as a punishment, but as a necessity. Not because the world doesn't want what they offer, but because the world doesn't know how to receive it. There comes a point in the life of every true genius where they must choose: do I dilute myself to be accepted, or do I remain whole and walk alone? And for Schopenhauer, the answer was always clear. The genius is not here to be successful in the eyes of the world. They are here to see further, to feel deeper, to unveil what lies beneath the surface, and that work, that sacred labor, often demands a life apart. Solitude, in this sense, is not the absence of company. It is the presence of clarity. It is the space where the genius no longer has to translate their thoughts into the language of the herd, where they don't have to justify their intensity, their obsession, their vision. In solitude, the genius becomes what they truly are, uncompromised. And it's in this raw, unfiltered state that the most powerful creations are born. Not in boardrooms, not in social circles, not in curated approval, but in the quiet, painful, luminous hours of being alone with the truth. But solitude is terrifying, not just because it's lonely, but because it strips away the illusions we use to comfort ourselves. When you're alone, there's no applause, no validation, no algorithm to tell you that you matter. There's only you and the weight of what you see. This is why so many who are born with genius abandon it, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack the will to endure the silence that comes with it. It's easier to fit in, to be liked, to be seen as normal. But deep down, you know what that costs. It costs your soul. And Schopenhauer would ask you, is it worth it? Is it worth muting your insight just to avoid being misunderstood? Is it worth abandoning your vision for the sake of applause that fades the moment you stop performing? Is it worth trading the infinite for the familiar? Because that's the real choice. Genius is not just a gift, it's a burden, a responsibility. It forces you to confront the world not as it pretends to be, but as it is. And what you find there may not be beautiful, It may be painful, but it is real. And in that reality there is something holy, something that makes the suffering worthwhile. Because to see clearly, even if only for a moment, is to touch the eternal. And that is more valuable than all the praise the world could ever give. So the question becomes, will you choose the path of the genius, knowing that it may cost you everything the world tells you to value? Can you let go of the need to be understood, admired, celebrated, and instead commit to what is true? Because if you can withstand the loneliness, endure the silence, and remain faithful to your vision, you will discover something the herd can never give you: peace. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace of alignment, of knowing that you did not betray your gift, and that you did not shrink to fit, that you lived not to please others but to reveal what only you could see. And that, in the end, is what Schopenhauer wanted us to understand, that the genius is not here to belong. They are here to awaken, and the world may dread them. But it also depends on them.